directly if you've got further things you want to follow up with those guys. We will move on to Bec because Bec's program is just as interesting. Bec's been working on a project around foot and mouth disease preparedness and prevention through a feral pig program. Bec's the New South Wales Feral Pig Coordinator, so she's working with New South Wales Local Land Services. She's been with Land Services for over 12 years and has huge experience in managing feral pigs and other pet animals. So please go ahead, Bec.
So much, John, and thanks Darren and Lockie for your presentation. So I've got two parts to my presentation this afternoon. First of all, we'll talk about the Foot and Mouth Disease Preparedness and Prevention Program, or FMD, much easier to call it that, and then I'll go into the current feral pig program. So Heather, thanks. Next slide. The FMD program came about a couple of years ago now, back in 2022, when the New South Wales government at the time announced a $65 million package. LLS received 22 million of that, and we split it across 3 different project areas. And we're here because we want to talk about pigs, so we'll focus on the invasive species component of the FMD program, but LLS also delivered on emergency management and animal biosecurity projects under the FMD program. So invasive species, thanks Heather, next slide. This invasive species program was split up into a couple of components itself. So first, we looked at the extension side. What we identified was there's some gaps in some of our resources. We can talk about, you know, the high level aspects of feral pig management, but what we don't have are really simple resources to help people understand exactly what we're talking about. Things like, what is free feeding anyway? You know, something simple like that. So we developed up a number of short videos that are in use at the moment to help tackle that gap in resourcing. We also looked at our feral animal aerial shooting team and an enhancement project associated with that to look at the capacity if there was an FMD outbreak in Australia. We also had expanded programs. So expanded programs were each LLS region. There's 11 LLS regions. Each region was given budget to deliver feral pig management activities in priority target areas. And then lastly, the intensive pest control zones, which Lockie and Darren just talked about, the intensive pest control zone for Northern Tablelands. So I'll talk to you now about a couple of other examples under the intensive pest control zone program component. Thanks, Heather. So the intensive pest control zones, and not to have too much repetition from Lockie's presentation, but they were theoretical infected premises, 13 across the state. Now 11 regions, 13 intensive zones. 2 of our regions elected to have 2 intensive pest control zones. That's that discrepancy, but already you can see on the map there where they were located, there's so much variability in the landscape. So we can expect so much variability in the project outcomes. Next slide, Heather. So the concept of the intensive pest control zones was, first of all, pre-control monitoring survey. Lockie and the Northern Tablelands example used an aerial drone, a fixed wing drone. Greater Sydney used a rotor wing drone. Most regions, though, put a helicopter up and either did aerial visual or aerial thermal surveys. And that map just shows you the difference across the region of which technique was employed. So pre-control survey was done, and then after the control activities were done, a post-control survey was done. That data was collected, and the team at the Vertebrate Pest Research Unit with New South Wales DPI, Dr. Jess Todd, Tanya Cox and Steve McLeod, helped us out with the analysis of the data. So some of those results is what we've got to talk about today. Thanks, Heather. The control phase. So here's where we can really start to see a lot of variation in the way regions approach the programs. Northern Tablelands, Lockie talked about the 4 aerial control programs every month, plus the ground control that was done by a contractor. And you can see across the different regions how it varied from, you know, 1 aerial shoot down in the Murray region in the south to being really intense, where in the centre of the state, Central West, 6 aerial control programs plus ground control implemented by a contractor. In the Western region, 4 aerial control programs plus ground control that was done by the landholders. Next slide, thanks Heather. We can start to see what some of that control data actually looks like. Now, Lockie did mention this, but it's the 15K radius of the project area, the 5K and then the 10K buffer. Our programs extended just past that to include, land holdings that kind of cross the boundary. So some of our data will talk about the program as a whole, whereas the analysis was done just within that project there, the 15-kilometre project area. Next slide, thanks Heather. So program results, the number of detections. Now this is a tricky one for us. To have really good data and high confidence in the data, we need to have 60 detections in our surveying. We struggled to get that across our sites. We didn't have enough survey effort and their sites were quite small. So our number of detections in our survey ranged from 1 to 71, an average of 30 across the sites. Then the density estimates and the abundance estimates that we got from the pre-control survey really varied. And again, we saw how varied our landscapes were that we were working with. So, that makes sense that there was variance there. So across all the 13 control zones, we had 1,346 hours of aerial control, 3,700 kilos of 1080 bait and 35 trays of hog on go out across as part of the control programs. And we ended up taking out 35,000 total animals. And this, I know it's a feral pig forum, but this program did cover cloven hooved animals. So deer, feral goats and feral pigs were the targets. For feral pig fans, 32,000 were removed under the intensive pest control zone program. So we can look a little deeper into a couple of scenarios or examples from the data that we've got. Thanks, Heather. On to the next one. This first example, 3 aerial control programs were implemented with a total of 120 hours of flight. And that graph looks amazing. That's what you want to see, isn't it? You want to see the number of animals you're culling go down over time. 1,415 feral pigs were removed across this program. There was no coordinated ground control as part of this program. It was just aerial control, but there were the usual landholder control activities. So likely that the landholders continued to do their general pest control, shooting, trapping, hunting, but that wasn't recorded or reported through to us as part of the program. So that graph looks great, and over time it's decreasing. Next slide, thanks Heather. We look at the data that we've collected under the survey, pre-control abundance estimates, and then the number of pigs controlled, and then the post-control survey. What we've shown is just this decrease of 34% in the estimated abundance. Now, this abundance is an index, of course, that's Darren mentioned that as well, but over time, that 34% is the reduction in the estimated abundance. And we just heard 70% as the figure of what we need to decrease just to maintain the population. And clearly that effort for this area was not enough. So let's go to another example. Thanks, Heather. This next scenario or next example, 6 aerial control programs plus ground control by a contractor, 164 hours of aerial shooting across the 6 programs, 840 kilos of 1080 bait, plus trapping, which took out another 631 feral pigs in this project area. Thanks, Heather. We'll move to the next one. Initial abundance estimates, then our feral pigs controlled in the middle column, and then our post-control abundance. 6 aerial control programs plus trapping plus baiting, and we got a 53% estimated abundance knockdown. So we're getting there. We're getting closer to that 70%, but still it's not enough to remove enough just to maintain the population. So we'll keep going, and we'll go to our third example. And this is 2 aerial control programs, 154 hours across the 2 programs, ongoing trapping programs across the intensive zone. 868 pigs were removed via trapping across this site. It was done by a contractor. a total of 6,539 pigs were taken out of this area across those 2 control programs. And we get to the next slide. Thanks, Heather. Our pre-control abundance, our number of pigs controlled in the middle again, and then our post-control survey estimates. And here that number looks so much better, 78% knockdown. So in this area, the level of effort required just to maintain or slightly get ahead of the reproduction rate of feral pigs was huge. 154 hours of shooting plus ongoing trapping, constantly trapping across this whole area to get that 78%. Thanks, Heather. On to the next one. So our lessons learned, and we've heard this already, but the effort required for effective feral pig control is huge. LLS has never had the resources prior to this proof of concept program to do something as intensive as what we did under the FMD program. The results really, I think, are a wake-up call for everybody involved in pest animal control, that this once-off effort is just not enough. We see it quite often, particularly around the stages of mature crops where aerial shooting will come in because there's pigs in the sorghum, for example. So aerial shoot, get rid of them, problem solved. That's great for asset management. You've saved some damage to your crop, but it's not impacting the overall population. And you're going to have those pigs back again next year and have the same issue. So we really need to start thinking about a strategic approach. And hopefully some of this lessons is not new to anybody, that this is stuff that we should already know, but this information is really reinforcing the fact. So integrated control, again, there is no one method that's going to be the silver bullet, and that was shown with Lockie's slides earlier. We need to integrate the controls with the effective knockdown. So baiting, trapping, and aerial control is really combined together in a coordinated approach. The repetition and the timing. So going back to that once-off treatment, it's not enough. So doing it again and doing it within the cycle of the feral pig reproduction, and making sure that we're continuing and then we're following up again. And using the strategic timing to work out, when in your landscape is the best time to target pigs, and what technique do you use at certain times of the year. Because we know that, aerial shooting in a mature sorghum crop is a challenge in itself in being able to see the pigs. Lockie, even with the GPS collared pigs, was hard to see them with the grass and the season being so good. So using different techniques at different times of the year to have the best impact. And last of all, participation. Again, this was mentioned again before from Darren and Lockie, but gaps in the program really impact on the overall population management. And we talk about working across boundaries and a nil tenure approach. And sometimes when nil tenure is brought up, it's often the first thought is, oh, it's private land versus public land, and we need to get across both those boundaries. And I think what we do really well is work with public land managers in a really good way. National parks, state forests are always jumping on board on programs, and often it's the gaps in the private landholders where we have the trouble. So again, our challenge is, how do we engage the people who aren't engaged in pest control and make it important to them? So there's a bit of a wrap up from the FMD program. A huge amount of data was collected out of that. A great effort across all of the LLS regions to implement that program. It was a short time frame that funding was available for. It did finish in June last year. The program's wrapped up, and there was so much information that the regions were able to get out of that. It's now led into the current feral pig program. Thanks, Heather. The current feral pig program is a $13 million program that was announced by the New South Wales government at the New South Wales Farmers Conference in July last year. It's come off the back of consecutive seasons that have been really favourable for feral pig reproduction. After the drought, control often drops off in the drought, which is a challenge in itself, but pig numbers are affected by the drought as well. And since it's become a lot better in the seasonal conditions, we've seen those pigs, the pig numbers explode across the state. Thanks, Heather. So the aim of the Feral Pig program is to really assist the landholders, land managers across New South Wales to reduce feral pig populations and the impacts they cause to agriculture and the environment. LLS is working with landholders to build their knowledge, their understanding, their capacity to be able to continue to implement effective control, regardless of funding. Right? We need to get people in a position where they're able to implement control in an effective way, regardless of there being external support. We've got landscape scale aerial shooting and ground control activities happening across the state, and LLS is trying to coordinate that with landholders, public and private, to really have that overall knockdown of numbers. We've got 3 new LSP areas. Now, LSP is landscape scale projects, and we talked about the intensive pest control zones under FMD being quite small. The landscape scale projects are, flip side, are quite big in terms of their scale. They're up to 1.2 million hectares in one of the areas. And the design or the concept is modelled off the program that you're probably familiar with, is the Western Riverina Pig program. We've got regional collaborative control programs. So outside of those 3 LSP areas, regions have funds to help support landholder coordinated programs and target more of those populations to have that knockdown so that landholders continue managing through. A feral fighter program has been implemented across the state with a consistent baseline, subsidising the costs of baiting for landholders and subsidising the cost of training, so that if anybody needs access to bait and to training to be able to use the bait, it's there and it's available and it's free. And establishing the Feral Pig Coordinator position to oversee the deliveries of the activities. Thanks, Heather. So the landscape scale projects that I mentioned, what's the idea behind these? Okay, so really we're looking to demonstrate best practice, that is integrated programs delivered in a coordinated manner across a broad scale area to get a bigger knockdown across a bigger part of the feral pig population. We've got the pre and post aerial monitoring of population estimates, again, to try and work out the effectiveness of programs and work out how much effort we need to apply to make sure we're hitting that 70%. We're integrating control programs, ground and aerial, so both of those are being implemented. Stakeholder engagement is a real focus, and capacity building to make sure that we can get as many people involved in pig control as we possibly can. The areas are targeted at protecting the high-value agricultural and environmental assets. So these locations for the LSPs are really targeted through that central sheep wheat belt where there is high-value agriculture and high populations associated, and targeted knockdown of high-density feral pig populations for ongoing management of landholders into the future. So across the 3 LSP areas, there's 1,700 odd holdings. Thanks, Heather. We'll move to the next one. I'll skip through these a little bit quicker. LSP 1, down in the south of the state, around the Lake Cargelligo area, covers or clips across 3 different LLS regions, Western, Central, Western, Riverina. And that program has 1.2 million hectares involved, and there's combined ground and aerial programs happening across LSP1. Thanks, Heather. On to LSP2. This is in the Coonabarabran and Coolah area up in Central West. Huge project in terms of the number of holdings involved in this one, 985 holdings. And thanks, Heather. On to LSP3. In the north of the state, west of Moree, in the Lower Guada area, where there is the Guada Wetlands National Park, which is a Ramsar listed wetland. A couple of really important river systems with a lot of irrigation and high value cropping up in that area. Thanks, Heather. On to the next one. And just to put it all on a map for you, this is what it's looking like across the state. So the Western Riverina project right there in the bottom, and then our 3 LSP areas. Now, in addition to those 3 LSP areas, we said before that the regions have funding to be able to target programs in priority areas across the individual region. that's where those blue and red dots are for. The blue dots are planned aerial control programs, and the red dots capacity building activities. Now, capacity building activities range from workshops, community meetings, demonstration sites, and sign-up meetings for control programs. And VPIT courses. The VPIT is the vertebrate pest induction training, which is either a face-to-face course or an online course, and it's free of charge, and that accreditation allows people to be able to access 1080 as well. That course is actually being revamped as part of the Feral Pig program. We've got a whole heap of more resources now that we're building into that online training now. So that's one thing that's coming out of this program as well. Thanks, Heather. A really important thing about the Feral Pig program is our communications and trying to reach audiences that we haven't been able to before using different methods. So our Feral Pig program website is up and updated fortnightly. Jump across there to keep up with the program. We do have every few months we have a progress update that's released, and we are just prepping for the next progress update, which is due out in the next couple of weeks. That will also be uploaded to the website or sing out if you'd like a copy. Thanks, Heather. This slide is also looking at some of those resources that we were able to develop under the FMD program but bring forward. So I mentioned those series of short videos. They're loaded onto our website to be able to use for training or to send out to landholders who might be new in pig control, and just give them a kind of that basic set of, here's your starting point, let's go from there. These are available on the website and to be linked to, as well as the events that are happening, the capacity building events. This week across the Hunter, there are a number of workshops that are happening across the Hunter region, and I know there's some in Southeast as well, but there's a whole list of them on the website, so jump on and take a look. And we're also trying to build up our social media presence and extend into that area as well, just to keep trying those different angles and different approaches to engaging landholders. Thanks, Heather. Finally, just a snapshot of some of the community events that have happened in the last couple of months or so. Thank you. Thanks, Heather. That's about all I've got for the FMD and Feral Pig program, but if anyone would like information, please reach out, get in touch. And just a shout out to the regional guys, the biosecurity officers that are working across the state and doing a brilliant job in getting this program delivered again before the end of June. All right, thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Bec. There's a huge amount in that program, and you need to be congratulated on rolling that out.